83% of people who consume self-help content never change a single behavior. Not one. That number comes from a University of Scranton study on behavioral follow-through, and it has been confirmed repeatedly across 2 decades of psychological research. Out of every 100 people who buy the book, watch the video, listen to the podcast, and feel that warm rush of possibility, 83 of them will be standing in the exact same spot 6 months later. Same habits, same excuses, same quiet frustration humming beneath the surface. And somewhere in your chest, you already knew that, because you have lived it. This is not an insult. This is a diagnosis. And it might be the most useful one you ever receive, because everything you have been taught about mental strength rests on a single, destructive assumption. The assumption is this: some people are simply built for pressure. They arrived on this planet with an invisible edge, a kind of psychological armor that lets them push through pain, stay locked in when others drift, and perform when the stakes are highest. And the rest of us just have to admire them from a distance and hope for the best. That assumption has cost you more than you realize. Because if mental strength is a fixed trait, something woven into your DNA before you took your first breath, then the game was over before it started. You were never in the running. And that quiet belief, buried so deep you might not even recognize it as a belief, is the exact reason most people stay exactly where they are. But here is what no one told you. Mental strength is not a characteristic. It is a competency. And like every competency that has ever been developed by a human being, it is built through structured, progressive, repeatable training. Not inspiration, not willpower, not consuming one more piece of content at 2 in the morning while telling yourself that this time will be different. Training. The same kind of training that turns a shaky beginner into a confident athlete. The same kind that transforms clumsy fingers into a surgeon's hands. Your mind follows the identical biological rules as your muscles. Load it with the right challenge, allow it to recover, and it reconstructs itself stronger than before. Shield it from all difficulty, and it deteriorates so completely that a passive-aggressive email on a Tuesday morning can dismantle your entire week. This is not poetry. This is measurable biology. Dr. Andrew Huberman's laboratory at Stanford University has demonstrated that the prefrontal cortex, the region of your brain governing discipline, sustained attention, and emotional regulation, physically strengthens through repeated engagement with demanding tasks. The neural pathways associated with self-control become denser and faster with use, in the same way muscle fibers thicken under progressive resistance. UCLA's Department of Psychiatry published a landmark study showing that genuine cognitive effort, the kind that feels uncomfortable and makes you want to quit, triggers neuroplasticity at a rate 47% higher than passive learning. Your brain rewires itself faster when you are struggling than when you are comfortable. The discomfort is not a side effect. The discomfort is the active ingredient. And if that is true, then most of what you have been doing to build mental strength has been the equivalent of watching someone else do push-ups and wondering why your arms are not growing. Let me make this concrete. The average person wakes up feeling flat and tells themselves they will start fresh tomorrow. They consume motivational content until a temporary electrical pulse moves through their nervous system, and they mistake that pulse for transformation. Research from the University of Pennsylvania shows that this chemical burst dissipates within 45 minutes. Then the flatness returns, now carrying an additional passenger called disappointment. The trained mind operates on entirely different machinery. It does not poll its emotions before acting. It does not ask, "Do I feel like doing this?" It asks a different question altogether. Is this consistent with who I have decided to become? That single recalibration, from mood-driven action to identity-driven action, separates the person who reads about discipline from the person who actually possesses it. And it is not genetic. It is practiced. Here is what that looks like at 5:30 in the morning. 2 people, same goal, same alarm, same darkroom. The alarm screams. The first person surfaces from sleep into that disorienting half-consciousness where the body is warm, the blankets are heavy, and the air outside the covers feels unreasonably cold against the skin. A negotiation begins immediately, automatic and persuasive. 5 more minutes. I did not sleep enough. One day will not matter. That negotiation, according to behavioral research from Case Western Reserve University, lasts approximately 9 seconds. And in those 9 seconds, the untrained mind almost always reaches the same verdict. The hand finds the phone. The snooze button absorbs the pressure of a fingertip. And with that single act, performed half asleep, the architecture of the entire day quietly collapses. Now the second person. Same alarm, same cold air, same weight of the blankets pulling downward. The discomfort is identical in every measurable way, but the response is not. There is no negotiation because there is no decision to make. The decision was finalized 12 hours ago. When the sound begins, feet meet the floor. Not because it feels good, not because motivation arrived in the night like some kind of gift, because a rule was established, and the rule is not subject to morning revisions. That is not superhuman discipline. That is a trained reflex. And it becomes easier with every single repetition because each one reinforces the neural connection between intention and execution. This is what mental gymnastics actually means. Not clever tricks you try once and discard. Not inspirational phrases pinned above your desk. A legitimate training methodology for your mind, built on the same principles that govern every elite physical training program ever designed. Progressive overload. You begin with challenges calibrated just beyond your current threshold, and you increase them deliberately over time. Consistency over intensity. A short daily mental workout produces more structural change than an occasional burst of frantic effort. Recovery and adaptation. You stress the system. You rest. The system rebuilds stronger. This is not motivational language. This is how neurons work. Specificity. You train the exact capacities you need. Focus is one muscle. Emotional regulation is another. Resilience under pressure is a third. Discipline without motivation is a fourth. Each one requires targeted, intentional practice. The reason most people never transform is not weakness. It is the absence of a system. They have been handed inspiration, which is the mental equivalent of watching a workout video from your couch. They have been handed scattered tips, which is like receiving a random list of exercises with no programming, no progression, and no accountability. And above all, they have been handed the lie that mental toughness is a permanent fixture of personality rather than a trainable capacity of the brain. That lie has expired. What you are holding is not another collection of ideas designed to make you feel momentarily energized. This is a training manual. Each chapter builds on the one before it. Every concept has a corresponding practice. And by the final page, you will not merely understand mental toughness as a theory. You will own a system to construct it, measure it, and sustain it for the rest of your life. But I will be direct with you. This process involves discomfort. Genuine mental training, like genuine physical training, requires you to do things you would rather avoid in moments when every part of you is campaigning for the easier option. If you want something that feels pleasant for 15 minutes and then releases you back into your existing patterns, you are in the wrong place. If you are still here, you have already separated yourself from the comfortable majority who would have stopped listening by now. Now here is what comes next. Understanding that your mind is trainable is the foundation, but the actual training ignites at a very specific moment. A moment that arrives every single day before you are fully awake, before you have made a single conscious choice. 94% of people surrender this moment without even recognizing they were in a fight. And that invisible surrender sets the direction for everything that follows. In the next chapter, you will learn what that moment is, why it carries more weight than any other decision you will make in 24 hours, and how winning it can permanently alter your relationship with discipline. The war begins before breakfast. And until now, you did not even know you were a soldier. Chapter 2. The Morning Battle. There is a war happening inside your bedroom every single morning, and you have been losing it for years without knowing it was even taking place. It lasts less than 10 seconds. There is no sound except the alarm. There is no audience. No one will ever know the outcome except you. And yet, this invisible 10-second confrontation determines more about the trajectory of your day than any meeting, any decision, or any conversation you will have in the next 16 hours. This is not exaggeration. This is architecture. Dr. Kathleen Voss at the University of Minnesota published a series of experiments demonstrating that self-regulatory capacity operates like a reservoir. Every act of self-control throughout the day draws from that same finite supply. But here is the finding that changed how performance psychologists think about mornings. The first act of self-regulation you perform each day sets the baseline pressure in that reservoir. When the first battle, and the system calibrates upward, lose it, and you spend the rest of the day operating from a deficit you never consciously chose. Your alarm goes off. That is the starting pistol. Everything that follows is a consequence. Let me take you inside that moment, because most people have never examined it closely enough to understand what is actually happening in their own nervous system. It is 5:30, or 6, or whatever time you told yourself mattered enough to set an alarm for. The sound cuts through sleep like a blade through fabric. Your eyes are not yet open. Your prefrontal cortex, the rational commander of your brain, is still booting up. It will not be fully operational for another 20 to 30 minutes. But your limbic system, the ancient emotional machinery that has kept humans alive for 200,000 years, is already wide awake. And it has one message. Stay. The bed is warm. The air beyond the blanket carries a faint chill that your skin registers before your mind does. The pillow has molded itself to the exact shape of your skull. Everything in your sensory environment is whispering the same seductive instruction. Do not move. This is not laziness. This is biology negotiating against your ambitions. And if you do not understand that negotiation, you will lose it every single time. What happens next takes approximately 9 seconds. Researchers at Case Western Reserve University measured the decision window for morning alarm responses and found that the average person resolves the stay or rise dilemma within this narrow band. 9 seconds. That is all. And in those 9 seconds, one of two things occurs. In the untrained mind, the limbic system runs the negotiation unchallenged. 5 more minutes will not matter. I was up late. I will compensate tonight. Each excuse arrives fluently, almost poetically, because this is a script your brain has rehearsed thousands of times. The hand reaches for the phone. The thumb finds the snooze button with the precision of a reflex, because at this point it is a reflex. And in that gesture, something far larger than 5 minutes is lost. You have just cast the first vote of the day for the version of yourself that negotiates with discomfort instead of overriding it. And that vote echoes forward into every subsequent decision. The workout you skip, the email you delay, the difficult conversation you postpone. None of those feel connected to the snooze button, but neurologically, they are running on the same circuit you weakened at 5:30. The trained mind encounters the identical moment. Same darkness, same warmth pulling downward, same ancient voice urging stillness. The difference is not the absence of resistance. The difference is the presence of a pre-installed instruction that outranks the resistance. Feet on the floor. No negotiation. No analysis. No polling of current emotional weather. The decision is not made in the morning. The decision was sealed the night before, and the morning is simply where it gets executed. This is what separates a rule from a preference. A preference bends under pressure. A rule does not recognize pressure as relevant information. And here's the part that changes everything. Each time you override the snooze impulse, you are not just waking up earlier. You are physically reinforcing a neural pathway that connects discomfort to action rather than discomfort to retreat. Stanford's neuroscience division has documented that repetitive morning activation of the prefrontal cortex against limbic resistance produces measurable increases in what researchers call executive override capacity. In non-technical language, your ability to do hard things when you do not feel like doing them literally gets stronger every time you practice it. The morning alarm is not just a wake-up call. It is a repetition, a mental rep, and you have been skipping it. Now I need to address something you might be thinking. You might be telling yourself that this is about waking up early. It is not. The specific hour is irrelevant. What matters is the relationship between the commitment you made and the action you take when that commitment becomes uncomfortable. You could set your alarm for 9 in the morning, and the principle would be identical. The question is not what time do you wake up. The question is, do you honor the agreement you made with yourself, or do you renegotiate it the moment it costs you something? Because that pattern does not stay in the bedroom. The person who renegotiates with their alarm renegotiates with their diet at lunch. They renegotiate with their workout at 6 in the evening. They renegotiate with their project deadline at 9 at night. Each renegotiation feels small and isolated in the moment. But McKinsey's behavioral science unit found that individuals who consistently fail to honor self-set commitments experience a 31% decline in what psychologists call self-efficacy, the belief that you are capable of following through on your own intentions. You are not just hitting snooze on an alarm. You are hitting snooze on your own credibility. And after enough repetitions, you stop believing yourself entirely. You set goals knowing, somewhere beneath conscious awareness, that you will not keep them. That is the real cost. Not 5 minutes of sleep. The erosion of self-trust. So how do you win this battle? Not with motivation. Motivation is not awake at 5:30. You win it with a protocol so simple it almost seems insulting. Tonight, before you sleep, you make one decision. You choose the time. You set the alarm. And then you add one sentence to the decision. When the alarm sounds, I stand. That is the entire protocol. No journaling, no visualization, no elaborate morning routine, just one binary action. Alarm equals standing. Everything else, the workout, the cold water, the meditation, all of that comes later. For now, the only training objective is the transfer from horizontal to vertical within the first 5 seconds of consciousness. 5 seconds. That is your rep. And if you think 5 seconds sounds too small to matter, consider this. The Journal of Personality and Social Psychology published a longitudinal study tracking habit formation across 864 participants. The single strongest predictor of sustained behavioral change was not the size of the new habit. It was the consistency of the initiation trigger. Small, repeatable, non-negotiable starting actions produced durable change at nearly 3 times the rate of ambitious but irregular commitments. Your feet hitting the floor is not a small act. It is the ignition sequence for an entirely different kind of day. Do this for 7 consecutive mornings and something shifts. Not in your schedule, in your identity. You begin to carry evidence that you are someone who does what they said they would do, even when the conditions are unfavorable. That evidence accumulates silently, and it changes the way you approach every other decision. Not because you read about discipline, because you practiced it. Physically, repeatedly, in the most unglamorous arena imaginable, your own dark bedroom at an hour when no one is watching. This is mental gymnastics at its most fundamental. One rep, one moment, one decision that ripples forward through 16 hours of choices you have not yet made. You now understand the battlefield and the first exercise. But winning the morning is only the beginning. Because there is something more dangerous than the snooze button waiting for you once you are upright and moving through your day. It disguises itself as fuel. It feels productive. Millions of people are addicted to it without realizing it is the very thing keeping them weak. In the next chapter, you will learn why motivation, the thing you have been chasing your entire adult life, is not your ally. It is the trap. Chapter 3: The Motivation Trap. Motivation does not build discipline. Motivation destroys it. And the reason you have never heard this before is because there is a $14 billion industry that depends on you never figuring it out. That number is real. The personal development market in the United States alone generates over $14 billion annually, according to market research estimates published in 2023. Seminars, courses, apps, books, podcasts, an entire economy engineered around one premise. You need to feel inspired before you can act. And every time that inspiration fades, which it always does, you need to come back and buy the next dose. This is not education. This is a subscription model for emotional dependency. And you have been enrolled in it for longer than you realize. Let me show you the mechanics of why this works so effectively against you. Because once you see the machinery, you cannot unsee it. When you consume motivational content, something measurable happens inside your brain. Dopamine floods your prefrontal cortex. Your pupils dilate slightly. Your breathing shifts. You feel a surge of clarity and purpose that is biochemically indistinguishable from the sensation of actually accomplishing something. Researchers at Vanderbilt University's Department of Psychology mapped this response in 2012 and found that dopamine released during anticipation of a reward is often larger than the dopamine released by the reward itself. Read that again. Your brain generates more pleasure from imagining success than from achieving it. This is the trap. You watch a video about discipline and your nervous system responds as though you just practiced it. You read about someone's transformation and your neurochemistry rewards you as if the transformation were yours. You close the book or end the video feeling elevated, capable, different. But you did not do anything. You consumed someone else's output and your brain marked it as your own progress. That counterfeit sense of completion is not a side effect of motivational content. It is the product, and it creates a cycle that is almost perfectly self-reinforcing. You feel stagnant, so you seek inspiration. The inspiration delivers a chemical reward. The reward temporarily alleviates the discomfort of stagnation. The discomfort returns, usually stronger, because now time has passed and nothing has changed. So you seek more inspiration. Each rotation through this loop costs you something you cannot earn back. Not money, time. And more importantly, something researchers at the University of Zurich call action credibility, the internal belief that you are someone who converts intention into behavior. Every lap through the motivation cycle without corresponding action erodes that belief by a measurable margin. You are not standing still. You are moving backward while feeling like you are advancing. Now here is the part that separates this chapter from everything you have heard about motivation before. The problem is not that motivation is weak. The problem is that motivation is strong, dangerously strong, strong enough to make you feel like you have already changed when you have not taken a single step, strong enough to replace the discomfort that would have actually driven you to act, strong enough to keep you loyal to a pattern that produces nothing except the need for more motivation. Consider what happens in a gym. Nobody watches someone else bench press for 30 minutes and then walks out believing their own chest got stronger. The absurdity is obvious in a physical context, but in the mental arena, this is precisely what millions of people do every day. So if motivation is not the fuel, what is? The answer is not willpower. Willpower is just motivation wearing a different uniform. It fluctuates with sleep, with blood sugar, with stress, with the weather. Dr. Roy Baumeister's ego depletion research at Florida State University demonstrated that willpower is a finite, depletable resource that weakens with each decision you force through it. Relying on willpower for sustained change is like trying to run a factory on a battery that drains faster than it charges. It might get you through a Monday. It will not carry you through a February. The actual fuel is identity. Not identity in the vague, self-help sense of the word. Identity in the operational sense. The set of internal standards you hold yourself to regardless of external conditions. The person who trains 5 mornings a week does not make 5 separate decisions each week. They made one decision once about who they are, and the 5 mornings are just the downstream behavior of that single commitment. The action is not motivated. The action is automatic, because it has been absorbed into the operating system of the self. This is the difference between someone who is trying to be disciplined and someone who has become disciplined. The first person is in a perpetual negotiation. Should I or should I not? The second person is not negotiating because there is nothing to negotiate. You do not debate whether to brush your teeth in the morning. You do not weigh the pros and cons. It is simply part of who you are. Discipline, at the elite level, operates with that exact same automaticity. And this is trainable. This is not philosophy. This is applied neuroscience. The basal ganglia, the brain region responsible for habit formation and automatic behavior, does not distinguish between physical habits and mental ones. When you repeat a behavior with enough consistency, the basal ganglia absorbs the pattern and moves it from conscious processing to automatic execution. MIT's McGovern Institute for Brain Research confirmed that this transfer typically begins within 18 to 21 days of unbroken repetition and solidifies between 60 and 90 days. This is not a motivational timeline. This is a neurological one. Your brain literally restructures itself to run the behavior without requiring a decision each time. So the practical question becomes this: how do you shift from motivation-dependent action to identity-driven action? You start with the smallest possible commitment that you are willing to execute without exception, not the biggest goal you can imagine. The smallest behavior you will not negotiate on. This is critical because the objective in the first 30 days is not transformation. It is consistency. You are not training the behavior. You are training the neural pathway that connects commitment to execution. The behavior is just the vehicle. Here is an example. You do not say, "I will meditate for 30 minutes every morning." That is an aspiration, and aspirations collapse under the weight of a single bad night of sleep. Instead, you say, "I will sit in silence for 90 seconds before I look at my phone." 90 seconds. And you protect that commitment as though your credibility depends on it, because it does. Every morning you honor it. You deposit evidence into an internal account that most people do not know exists. Psychologists call it self-concordance, the alignment between what you say you will do and what you actually do. The untrained mind has an empty account. It sets goals, and its own biology does not believe them, because the historical record is a long list of broken commitments. The trained mind carries a surplus. It sets a target, and the entire system mobilizes behind it, because the pattern of follow-through has been documented so many times that the brain treats execution as the default rather than the exception. This is why the motivation industry cannot help you. It is trying to fill an emotional tank when the real deficit is in your credibility account. No amount of inspiration compensates for a self-concordance balance of 0. So tonight, you make a decision, not a goal, a decision. You choose one behavior that you will perform every day for the next 7 days without modification and without exception. It should be small enough that you have no valid excuse to skip it, and specific enough that completion is binary. You either did it or you did not. When the 7 days are done, you will not feel a motivational surge. That is not the objective. What you will feel is something far more valuable and far more durable. You will feel the faint, unfamiliar weight of your own word meaning something again. That weight is the foundation everything else in this book is built on. But there is a problem. Even with an identity shift underway, even with your credibility account growing, something will try to pull you backward. It is not laziness. It is not distraction. It is something far more fundamental, and most personal development content either ignores it entirely or gets it dangerously wrong. The force that holds people in mediocrity is not the absence of effort. It is the presence of comfort. And comfort is not your friend. What it actually is, and how to weaponize it, is the subject of the next chapter. Chapter 4: The Pressure Principle. There is a reason Navy SEALs do not train in comfortable environments. There is a reason surgeons are not certified after watching videos. There is a reason the most mentally resilient people you have ever encountered share one common biography, and it is never a biography of ease. The reason is simple, and it contradicts almost everything modern culture has taught you about well-being. Comfort does not protect the mind. Comfort dissolves it. That statement will feel wrong at first. It should. You have spent your entire life being told the opposite. Reduce stress. Eliminate friction. Optimize for ease. Protect yourself from discomfort. The message is everywhere, embedded in product design, workplace policy, lifestyle content, and the algorithms that curate your daily information diet. And on the surface, it makes perfect sense. Why would anyone voluntarily seek difficulty when smoother options exist? Because difficulty is not damage. Difficulty is a stimulus. And without it, the system you are trying to strengthen has no reason to grow. Dr. Nassim Nicholas Taleb formalized this concept at New York University under a term that has since reshaped how performance scientists think about human adaptation. He called it anti-fragility. Fragile systems break under stress. Robust systems endure stress. But anti-fragile systems actually improve because of stress. They need the pressure. They require the disruption. Without it, they do not just remain static. They degrade. Your mind is an anti-fragile system, and you have been treating it like it is fragile. Think about what happens to a muscle you never use. It does not stay the same. It atrophies. The fibers thin. The connections weaken. Given enough time without load, a perfectly healthy muscle becomes unable to perform the tasks it was originally built for. Not because it was damaged, because it was protected. The absence of demand was the damage. Your prefrontal cortex follows the same trajectory. Research published in the journal Neuropsychology demonstrated that adults who consistently avoid cognitively demanding tasks show measurable cortical thinning in the regions responsible for decision-making and impulse control over a span as short as 18 months. The brain did not encounter disease. It encountered comfort. And comfort, in the absence of challenge, functions as a slow-acting corrosive. This is not a metaphor. The tissue literally recedes. So when you spend your evening choosing the easiest entertainment, avoiding the conversation that makes you uneasy, selecting the task that requires the least resistance, you are not resting. You are performing the mental equivalent of lying in bed for 6 months and wondering why your legs feel weak when you finally try to stand. Now here is where this becomes actionable rather than just alarming. The principle of progressive overload, the foundation of every effective physical training program, applies to cognitive and emotional capacity with remarkable precision. The American College of Sports Medicine defines progressive overload as the gradual increase of stress placed upon the body during training. Substitute body with mind, and the definition holds perfectly. You do not build mental strength by confronting your deepest fear on day one. You build it by systematically introducing doses of manageable discomfort that increase in intensity over time. The key word is manageable. This is not about suffering for its own sake. Indiscriminate hardship does not produce toughness. It produces trauma. The difference between training and damage is structure. A barbell builds your back. A car accident breaks it. Both involve force on the spine. The distinction is control, progression, and intention. So what does controlled mental overload look like in practice? It looks like choosing the cold shower for 90 seconds when every nerve in your body is lobbying for warm water. Not because cold exposure is magic, because the act of voluntarily entering discomfort when a comfortable alternative is available exercises the exact neural circuit that governs every other hard choice you will face that day. Dr. Susanna Soberg at the University of Copenhagen published findings in 2022 showing that deliberate cold exposure activates the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, a region directly linked to willpower and the ability to persist through resistance. But the critical finding was not the cold itself. It was the voluntary nature of the exposure. Subjects who chose to enter cold water showed significantly greater activation than those who were forced into it. The decision to approach discomfort, not the discomfort alone, is what triggers the adaptation. This reframes everything. The specific form of the challenge matters far less than the act of choosing it. The cold shower is one vehicle. Others are equally effective. Speaking first in a meeting when your instinct is to stay silent. Holding eye contact 2 seconds longer than feels natural. Sitting with boredom for 20 minutes without reaching for your phone. Telling someone the truth when a comfortable half-truth is available. Each of these is a rep. Each one loads the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. Each one builds the same capacity. The willingness to be uncomfortable on purpose, in small controlled doses, with consistency. And here is the finding that most people never hear about, because it contradicts the wellness narrative so directly. The anterior mid-cingulate cortex is one of the only brain regions that has been observed to physically grow in adults who regularly engage in tasks they do not want to do. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, a neuroscientist at Northeastern University, highlighted this structure as central to what she calls the superager phenomenon, individuals in their 70s and 80s who maintain the cognitive performance of people decades younger. The commonality among these individuals was not genetics. It was not diet. It was a lifelong pattern of voluntarily engaging with difficulty rather than avoiding it. The people who stayed mentally sharp were the ones who never stopped loading the bar. Now contrast this with what most people do. They construct their lives to minimize friction. They automate decisions. They curate their environment to reduce surprise and effort. And in doing so, they build an existence that feels smooth on the surface but is producing progressive weakness underneath. Every friction they eliminate is a rep they skip. Every discomfort they avoid is a set they forfeit. And after years of this optimization toward ease, they find themselves unable to handle a layoff, a breakup, a health scare, or even a sustained period of ambiguity without psychological collapse. Not because the event was catastrophic, because their capacity to tolerate difficulty had been quietly eroding for a decade. The untrained mind treats discomfort as a signal to retreat. The trained mind recognizes it as a signal that adaptation is in progress. That single interpretive difference determines which person crumbles at the first sign of pressure and which one leans forward into it. So here is your training protocol for this chapter. Starting tomorrow, you will introduce one voluntary discomfort into your day. Not something extreme. Something that registers as genuinely unpleasant but fully manageable. It could be 2 minutes of cold water at the end of your shower. It could be initiating one difficult conversation you have been postponing. It could be sitting in complete silence for 10 minutes with no input, no screen, no distraction, just you and whatever thoughts arrive. The specific choice matters less than 2 non-negotiable criteria. First, it must be voluntary. You choose it. No one imposes it. Second, it must occur daily. Sporadic discomfort does not produce adaptation. Consistent exposure does. Do this for 14 days, and you will notice something that no motivational video has ever delivered. You will not feel inspired. You will feel capable. There is an enormous difference between those two sensations, and once you have tasted the second one, the first one loses its grip entirely. You now have 3 tools. The morning battle trains your initiation circuit. The identity commitment trains your follow-through circuit. The pressure principle trains your tolerance circuit. Together, they form the first half of the mental gymnasium you are building. But there is a vulnerability in this system, a leak that can drain everything you have constructed without making a sound. It does not look like a threat. It looks like excitement. It feels like progress. And almost everyone engages in it daily without any awareness that it is sabotaging their results. In the next chapter, you will learn why the simple act of talking about your goals might be the most damaging habit you have never questioned. Chapter 5: Silence Protocol. Every time you announce a goal out loud, your brain quietly registers it as accomplished. This is not a theory. This is a measured neurological event, and it has been silently disabling your ability to follow through for years. In 2009, Dr. Peter Gollwitzer at New York University published a study that sent a tremor through behavioral psychology. He divided participants into 2 groups, both with identical personal goals. The first group announced their goals to others. The second group kept them private. Both groups were then given 45 minutes to work toward their stated objective. The results were not subtle. The group that had shared their intentions publicly quit significantly earlier. They reported feeling closer to their goal despite having done less actual work. And when researchers measured their subsequent behavior over the following weeks, the pattern held. The announcers consistently underperformed the silent group by a measurable and persistent margin. The explanation lies in something Gollwitzer termed premature identity signaling. When you tell someone you are going to run a marathon, write a book, launch a business, or transform your body, your brain processes the social acknowledgement as partial completion of the goal. The dopamine reward that should arrive after months of effort gets dispensed in the moment of announcement. You receive the neurochemical payoff of achievement without the achievement. And once that reward has been collected, the motivational pressure to actually do the work drops sharply, because as far as your limbic system is concerned, the mission is already underway. The gap between intention and completion has been artificially narrowed by nothing more than spoken words and a listener's nod. This is dopamine hijacking, and you have probably experienced it dozens of times without recognizing the pattern. Think about the last time you told a friend about a new plan. Maybe it was a fitness goal, maybe a career change, maybe a creative project. Remember the feeling during that conversation, the energy, the clarity, the sense that this time was different. Now think about what happened in the days that followed. The energy softened, the clarity blurred. The project that felt so alive over dinner gradually receded into the long list of things you were going to get around to. You did not abandon the goal consciously. You simply ran out of fuel for it because the fuel had already been burned in the conversation. This is not a character flaw. This is a neurological sequence that operates identically in nearly every human brain. And the only reliable defense against it is deliberate, strategic silence. Now here is where most people resist. Because silence feels unnatural. Sharing goals feels productive. It feels like accountability. You tell yourself that by announcing your intentions, you are creating external pressure to follow through. Accountability partners, public commitments, social contracts. The entire culture of goal setting is built on the assumption that telling people what you plan to do increases the probability that you will do it. The research says otherwise. A follow-up study published in the journal Motivation Science in 2018 examined whether framing public commitments as accountability mechanisms changed the outcome. It did not. Regardless of whether the announcement was framed as a casual mention or a formal accountability pledge, the effect was consistent. Public declaration of identity-related goals reduced subsequent effort. The critical variable was not how the goal was shared. It was whether the act of sharing triggered social recognition of the intended identity. Once that recognition was received, the internal drive to earn it through action diminished. This does not mean you should never speak about your ambitions. It means you need to understand the precise cost of doing so and make a calculated decision about when that cost is worth paying. Here is the operational rule. Do not announce what you are becoming. Demonstrate what you have become. There is a vast neurological difference between those two positions. The announcement borrows against future achievement and spends the emotional currency in advance. The demonstration deposits evidence after the work is done and earns compound interest on every subsequent goal. One drains the account, the other builds it. And this connects directly to the self-concordance principle from the previous chapter. Every time you talk about a goal you have not yet achieved, you create a discrepancy between your public image and your private reality. Your brain notices this gap even if your audience does not. And over time, that gap becomes normalized. You become someone who speaks in futures that never arrive. Your own nervous system begins to discount your declarations the way a bank discounts a borrower with a history of defaults. The words still come out, but the internal machinery no longer mobilizes behind them. The trained mind operates in reverse. It executes first and narrates later, if at all. The results do the speaking because results are immune to inflation. You cannot exaggerate a body that visibly changed. You cannot fabricate a business that generates revenue. You cannot fake the quiet confidence of someone who accomplished something difficult without advertising it in advance. Silence protects the integrity of the process. This is what I call the silence protocol, and it has 3 operational components. The first component is input restriction. For the next 30 days, you stop telling people about goals that are still in progress. Not because secrecy has inherent value, because every disclosure is a micro-withdrawal from your motivational account, and you need that balance intact for the work itself. If someone asks what you're working on, you give a truthful but minimal response. I am working on something. I will share it when it is ready. That is sufficient. The urge to elaborate, to paint the full picture, to watch their face light up with approval. That urge is the exact impulse you are training yourself to override. The second component is output verification. Before you speak about any intention, you ask a single internal question. Have I already earned the right to say this through action? If the answer is no, you remain silent. If the answer is yes, you share freely. This is not suppression. It is sequencing. You are not hiding your ambitions. You are aligning your communication with your execution timeline. Words come after work, never before it. The third component is energy redirection. The conversational energy you previously spent describing your plans now gets redirected into the plans themselves. This is not a small transfer. Dr. Ibrahim Sinay at the University of Illinois found that individuals who internally question their goals using interrogative self-talk, asking will I do this rather than declaring I will do this, showed significantly higher rates of follow-through. The declarative frame triggers the same premature closure as public announcement. The interrogative frame keeps the loop open, keeps the tension alive, and keeps the brain searching for completion rather than resting in the illusion of it. Silence is not passive. Silence is a strategic allocation of cognitive resources. Every word you do not spend on announcing is a unit of energy preserved for executing. And execution, accumulated quietly over weeks and months, produces something that no announcement ever could: undeniable evidence. You have likely met someone like this. Someone who said very little about their plans, but seemed to produce results that surprised everyone around them. You probably attributed it to talent or luck or some hidden advantage. But the advantage was not hidden. It was silence. They simply refused to spend their fuel on performance and invested it entirely in production. That is the caliber of mind you are building. So tonight, make one adjustment. Choose the goal that matters most to you right now, the one you have probably already told several people about, and stop talking about it. Completely. For 30 days. Do not post about it. Do not update anyone on your progress. Do not seek encouragement or validation. Just work in silence and observe what happens to your energy, your consistency, and your relationship with the goal itself when the only audience is the mirror you now hold for instruments. The morning battle, the identity commitment, the pressure principle, the silence protocol. Together, they form a system that most people will never encounter, because most people are too busy announcing their intentions to ever execute them. But there is still a critical gap. All four instruments require something you have not yet trained directly, a capacity that modern life is systematically destroying at an accelerating rate. Without it, every protocol you have learned collapses under the weight of a single notification, a single distraction, a single wandering thought. In the next chapter, you will learn why focus is not a talent but a muscle, why yours has probably atrophied to a dangerous degree, and exactly how to rebuild it from the ground up. Chapter 6. Training Focus Like a Muscle. The average human attention span has dropped to 8.25 seconds. A goldfish holds attention for 9. That comparison, first published by Microsoft's Canadian Research Division in 2015 and subsequently debated across neuroscience journals, may be imprecise in its methodology. But the direction of the trend is not in dispute. Every major longitudinal study on sustained attention conducted in the past 2 decades points in the same direction. Down. Consistently, measurably, acceleratingly down. And the cause is not some mysterious decline in human capability. The cause is sitting in your pocket right now. Dr. Gloria Mark at the University of California, Irvine spent over 2 decades tracking how long people sustain attention on a single task before switching. In 2004, the average was 2.5 minutes. By 2012, it had fallen to 75 seconds. Her most recent data, published in her 2023 book on attention, places the current average at 47 seconds. Not 47 minutes. 47 seconds. That is how long your brain is willing to stay on a single task before it begins scanning for something newer, faster, or more stimulating. This is not a personal failing. This is an adaptive response to an environment that rewards switching. Every notification, every auto-playing video, every algorithm-curated feed is training your brain to fragment. And your brain, being the efficient adaptation machine that it is, has obliged. It has restructured itself to match the demands of the environment. The problem is that the environment it has adapted to is designed to capture your attention, not to serve your goals. You have been doing reps in the wrong gym. And here is the part that should concern you more than the statistics themselves. Focus is not a fixed trait. It is a capacity. It strengthens with deliberate use and deteriorates with neglect. This is not a motivational reframe. This is observable neural architecture. Dr. Amishar Jha, a neuroscientist at the University of Miami and one of the leading researchers on attention training, has demonstrated through controlled studies with military personnel that focused attention can be systematically rebuilt through structured practice. Soldiers who completed her 12-minute daily attention training protocol showed measurable improvements in sustained focus, working memory accuracy, and resistance to distraction within 4 weeks. Soldiers who did not receive the same deployment stress and showed the expected cognitive decline. The same brain, the same environment, opposite trajectories. The only variable was whether the attention system was being trained or allowed to erode. This means the fragmented, scattered, notification-addicted state of mind you have been living in is not permanent. It is a training outcome. You trained your brain to be distracted by spending years in a distraction-rich environment without any counterbalancing protocol. And you can reverse the process with the same mechanism that created it: repetition. But you cannot train focus the way most people attempt it. The typical approach is to announce a commitment to deep work, sit down with grand intentions, last 11 minutes before reaching for the phone, feel defeated, and conclude that focus is simply not one of their strengths. This is the equivalent of someone who has not exercised in 3 years walking into a gym, attempting to bench press 200 pounds, failing, and deciding they are not built for fitness. The failure was not a diagnosis. It was a predictable consequence of loading a capacity that has not been progressively developed. You do not start where you want to be. You start where you are. Here's the protocol. It is called the focus sprint, and it operates on the same progressive overload principle you have been applying to every other mental capacity in this book. Day 1 through 7. You set a timer for 10 minutes. During those 10 minutes, you work on a single task. One task. No phone, no browser tabs, no music with lyrics, no interruptions that are within your control to prevent. When the timer sounds, you stop. That is 1 rep. You perform 1 rep per day for the first week. This will feel insultingly easy to read about and surprisingly difficult to execute. 10 unbroken minutes of single-task focus for a brain that has been switching contexts every 47 seconds represents a genuine neurological challenge. You will feel the pull. Somewhere around minute 3 or 4, an impulse will surface. Check something, open something, glance at something. That impulse is not a distraction. That impulse is the resistance. It is the mental equivalent of the barbell feeling heavy on your chest. And the moment you hold position instead of surrendering to it, you have completed a rep that physically strengthens the anterior cingulate cortex and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the 2 regions most responsible for attentional control. Week 2, the timer extends to 15 minutes. Same rules, same single task restriction. 1 rep per day. Week 3, 20 minutes. Week 4, 25. By the end of 30 days, you are holding unbroken focus for 25 minutes, which places you in approximately the top 8% of working adults according to productivity research conducted by Rescue Time across 11,000 users. Top 8%. Not through talent, through 4 weeks of progressive reps. Now here is the layer most focus advice completely ignores. The quality of what you focus on during these sprints matters as much as the duration. Dr. K. Anders Ericsson, the late psychologist at Florida State University, whose research on deliberate practice reshaped our understanding of expertise, made a critical distinction between focused effort and mere repetition. Deliberate practice requires engagement at the edge of current ability. It must be demanding enough to require genuine cognitive effort, but not so overwhelming that the brain disengages entirely. Your focus sprints should target work that stretches you. Not email, not administrative tasks, not comfortable routine. The task should require enough of your cognitive architecture that distraction becomes costly, because the brain only reinforces attentional circuits when the stakes of losing focus are real. This is where focus training intersects with the pressure principle from 2 chapters ago. The discomfort you feel when resisting the urge to switch tasks is not a symptom of weakness. It is the active ingredient of the adaptation process. Every second you hold attention against that pull is a second of genuine neurological construction. And the compound effect of these seconds, accumulated across weeks and months, produces a qualitative shift in how your mind operates. Tasks that once felt unbearable after 8 minutes begin to feel manageable after 30. The phone that once pulled at your awareness every 90 seconds fades into peripheral irrelevance. Not because you suppress the urge, because the circuitry that generates the urge has been outcompete by the circuitry you built through training. This is not willpower. This is architecture. And it changes more than your productivity. It changes the texture of your experience. A mind that can sustain focus experiences time differently. Conversations become richer because you are actually present for them. Problems become solvable because you can hold the complexity long enough to see the structure within the chaos. Creative work becomes accessible because insight requires the kind of sustained cognitive engagement that a fragmented mind never reaches. The psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi spent 3 decades studying what he called flow states, the condition of total absorption in a task. His finding, documented across hundreds of interviews and thousands of data points, was consistent. Flow is not random. Flow is the predictable consequence of matching high challenge with high skill in an environment of sustained, uninterrupted focus. You cannot enter flow in 47-second intervals. The door only opens after extended, unbroken engagement. Focus is the doorway, and you have been living with it nailed shut. Starting tonight, set your timer for tomorrow. 10 minutes. One task. No negotiation with the impulse to switch. When the pull arrives, and it will arrive, you hold. That is the rep. That is the entire exercise. And every day you complete it, the door opens a fraction wider. You now hold 5 instruments. Morning battle. Identity commitment. Pressure principle. Silence protocol. Focus sprint. Each one trains a distinct neural capacity. Each one compounds the others. But there is one domain you have not yet addressed, and it is the domain where most people experience their most catastrophic failures. Not in discipline, not in focus, not in resilience. In the 6 seconds between an emotional trigger and the response that follows. In the next chapter, you will learn why emotional regulation is not about suppression, why the people who appear calm under pressure are not feeling less than you, and how 6 seconds of trained stillness can prevent decisions you would spend years regretting. Chapter 7. Emotional representatives. The calmest person in the room is not feeling less than you. They are feeling everything you are feeling. The difference is that somewhere between the trigger and the response, they have trained a gap that you have not. That gap lasts approximately 6 seconds. And those 6 seconds are the most valuable piece of real estate in your entire psychological architecture. Most people never learn this. They assume that emotional control means emotional suppression. That the person who stays composed during a confrontation is somehow numb, naturally cold, or genetically wired for detachment. This assumption is not just wrong. It is the precise misunderstanding that keeps most people trapped in a cycle of reactive behavior they cannot seem to escape. Here is what actually happens inside the brain when something triggers you. An external event, a comment, a tone of voice, an unexpected setback, enters through your sensory system and arrives at the amygdala in approximately 12 milliseconds. The amygdala is ancient. It predates language, logic, and every sophisticated thought you have ever had. Its sole function is threat assessment, and it operates with a single priority: speed over accuracy. It classifies the incoming signal as safe or dangerous and launches a neurochemical cascade before your conscious mind has even registered what happened. This is what Dr. Daniel Goleman at Rutgers University famously termed the amygdala hijack. A flood of cortisol and adrenaline surges through your system. Your heart rate accelerates. Your muscles tense. Your prefrontal cortex, the rational command center that could evaluate the situation with nuance and proportion, gets temporarily throttled. Blood flow to the frontal lobes measurably decreases during acute emotional arousal. The part of your brain that could say this is not actually a threat is the same part that goes partially offline the moment you need it most. This is why intelligent people say unintelligent things in arguments. This is why composed professionals send emails they regret 90 seconds later. This is why a single offhand remark from a colleague at 9 in the morning can contaminate every interaction you have until midnight. The amygdala fired. The prefrontal cortex was outrun, and the response that followed was generated by the oldest, least sophisticated part of your neural hardware. Now here is the critical finding. The amygdala's chemical assault on the prefrontal cortex is not permanent. It is temporary. Neuroimaging research conducted at the National Institute of Mental Health shows that the cortisol spike from an acute emotional trigger begins to dissipate within 6 seconds if no additional fuel is added. 6 seconds. That is the biological half-life of a reactive impulse. If you can hold the space between the trigger and your response for that duration, the prefrontal cortex begins to regain influence. Rational processing comes back online. The emotional charge does not vanish, but the compulsive urgency behind it loosens its grip enough for you to choose your response rather than be chosen by it. 6 seconds is the difference between a reaction and a decision. And that difference has measurable consequences that extend far beyond a single moment. Dr. John Gottman at the University of Washington, who spent 4 decades studying interpersonal dynamics, found that individuals who consistently respond reactively in emotionally charged situations experience a cumulative erosion of trust in every relationship they maintain. The damage is not from the content of what they say. It is from the pattern. Reactive people become unpredictable, and unpredictable people gradually lose the confidence of everyone around them. The trained mind does not eliminate the trigger. The trained mind inserts a buffer between the trigger and the output. And that buffer is not talent. It is a practice skill with a specific technique. Here is the drill. It is called the 6-second hold, and it is the emotional equivalent of the focus sprint from the previous chapter. When you feel a reactive impulse rising, you do 3 things in sequence. First, you notice. This sounds elementary, but it is the step most people skip entirely. The amygdala fires, and they are already mid-response before conscious awareness catches up. The practice of noticing means you train yourself to recognize the physical precursors of reactivity. A tightening in the jaw, a heat spreading across the chest, a sudden sharpness behind the eyes. These signals arrive before the words do, and they are your early warning system. Dr. Matthew Lieberman at UCLA published a study demonstrating that the simple act of labeling an emotion as it arises, even internally, reduces amygdala activation by up to 30%. Naming the state creates cognitive distance from it. You shift from being the emotion to observing the emotion, and that shift alone buys you time. Second, you hold. For 6 seconds, you do nothing externally. You do not speak. You do not type. You do not gesture. You breathe. One full inhale through the nose, slow and deliberate, followed by one extended exhale through the mouth. This is not meditation. This is applied neuroscience. The extended exhale activates the vagus nerve, which directly stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system and counteracts the sympathetic arousal triggered by the amygdala. Your heart rate decelerates. Cortisol production slows. The prefrontal cortex receives increased blood flow. You are not suppressing the emotion. You are giving your rational brain enough time and oxygen to participate in the response. Third, you choose. After the 6-second hold, you ask one question. What does this situation actually require? Not what does my anger want? Not what would feel satisfying in this moment? What does the situation require? That reframe moves the decision from the emotional center to the executive center, and the response that emerges from that place is almost always more precise, more proportionate, and more strategically effective than whatever would have launched out of the amygdala's unfiltered impulse. Notice, hold, choose, 3 steps, 6 seconds. That is the entire architecture. And like every other capacity in this book, it is built through repetition. You do not wait for a crisis to practice this. You practice it on small triggers so that the pattern is already installed when the large ones arrive. Someone cuts you off in traffic. A coworker interrupts you mid-sentence. A notification delivers mildly irritating news. These are not annoyances. These are training stations. Every time you run the 6-second protocol on a minor trigger, you are strengthening the same neural pathway that will hold under genuine pressure. The untrained mind reacts to every trigger at full volume because it has no dimmer switch. A minor inconvenience and a genuine emergency receive the same neurochemical response, the same cortisol spike, the same hijacked prefrontal cortex. This is metabolically expensive and socially destructive. The trained mind maintains a calibrated response gradient. Small triggers receive minimal output. Moderate triggers receive measured engagement. Only genuine threats receive the full mobilization of the stress response. This calibration is not emotional numbness. It is emotional precision. And it is one of the most visible markers of a mind that has been deliberately conditioned. People notice this. They cannot always articulate what they are observing, but they feel it. The person who pauses before responding in a heated meeting carries a different gravity than the person who fires back instantly. The pause communicates something that words cannot. It signals that the response was selected, not reflexive. And that selection, visible in real time, builds a form of authority that no title or credential can replicate. Starting today, you practice on the smallest triggers available. The next time you feel irritation begin to rise, from any source, you run the protocol. Notice the physical signal. Hold for 6 seconds with one deliberate breath cycle. Then choose your response from the rational center rather than the reactive one. Do this 3 times per day for 7 days. By the end of the week, you will not have eliminated emotional reactivity, but you will have established a neural pattern that interrupts it, and each repetition will make that interruption faster, smoother, and more automatic. You are building a mind that responds instead of reacts. And that distinction will change the quality of every conversation, every negotiation, and every high-pressure moment you encounter. But emotional control is only half of the equation. Controlling your reaction in a single moment is essential. Sustaining your composure across months and years of setbacks, failures, and unexpected reversals requires something deeper. Something most people believe they either have or do not, but which is, like everything else in this book, entirely trainable. In the next chapter, you will learn what resilience actually is, why it has nothing to do with endurance, and how the people who recover fastest from failure are using a specific mental operation that you can install in less than 2 weeks. Chapter 8: The Resilience Set. The American Psychological Association spent over a decade studying people who survived catastrophic loss, career destruction, life-threatening illness, and prolonged periods of extreme adversity. Their conclusion, published across multiple peer-reviewed papers and summarized in their Resilience Task Force report, was not what most people expect. Resilience is not a trait that some people possess and others lack. It is a set of behaviors, thought patterns, and practiced responses that can be learned and developed by virtually anyone. Read that again, because it dismantles the last excuse standing between you and the mind you are building. Every other capacity in this book, discipline, focus, emotional regulation, pressure tolerance, followed the same pattern. You assumed it was fixed. The science showed it was trainable. Resilience is no different. But resilience is misunderstood more deeply than any of the others, because the popular definition is almost entirely wrong. Most people define resilience as the ability to endure, to take the hit and keep going, to absorb punishment without falling down. This is the Hollywood version of mental toughness, the clenched jaw, the gritted teeth, the relentless forward motion through pain. It looks impressive in a montage, and it is a dangerously incomplete model of how resilience actually operates in the human brain. Endurance without adaptation is not resilience. It is attrition, and attrition has a ceiling. Push against it long enough without evolving your approach, and you do not become stronger. You become depleted, brittle, and eventually broken in a way that looks sudden to everyone watching but was accumulating for months. True resilience is not about how much you can absorb. It is about how quickly and effectively you convert a setback into usable information. The resilient mind does not simply survive failure. It metabolizes failure. It extracts the specific lesson embedded in the experience, integrates that lesson into its operating model, and re-engages with an updated strategy. The speed and quality of that metabolic cycle is what separates someone who collapses after 2 setbacks from someone who improves because of 20. This is not abstract philosophy. This is a documented neurological process. Dr. Richard Tedeschi and Dr. Lawrence Calhoun at the University of North Carolina coined the term post-traumatic growth in the mid-1990s after studying hundreds of individuals who experienced significant adversity. Their research revealed that a substantial percentage of people who endure severe setbacks do not merely return to their previous baseline. They exceed it. They report greater personal strength, deeper relationships, enhanced appreciation for life, recognition of new possibilities, and accelerated psychological development. Not despite the adversity, through it. But here is the finding that makes this relevant to your training rather than just intellectually interesting. Post-traumatic growth was not random. It did not occur automatically in everyone who suffered. It correlated specifically with individuals who engaged in what Tedeschi called deliberate rumination, a structured process of actively examining the experience, questioning existing assumptions, and consciously reconstructing their understanding of themselves and their capabilities. In contrast, individuals who engaged in intrusive rumination, the uncontrolled, repetitive, emotionally charged replaying of the event without structure or direction, showed no growth and frequently showed decline. Same event, same severity, opposite outcomes. The variable was not the trauma. It was the cognitive operation applied to the trauma. This means resilience is not about what happens to you. It is about the specific mental process you run after what happens to you. And that process can be trained as precisely as a focused sprint or a 6-second hold. Here's the protocol. It is called the failure reframe, and it contains 3 stages that should be executed within 24 hours of any significant setback, disappointment, or unwanted outcome. Stage 1 is separation. Within the first hours after the event, your limbic system will attempt to fuse your identity with the failure. I failed becomes I am a failure. The project did not work becomes I am not capable. This fusion is automatic, rapid, and if left unchallenged, it hardens into a belief that will constrain every future attempt. The separation exercise is a single written or spoken sentence that splits the event from the self. The format is precise. The outcome was X. I am still Y. For example, the pitch was rejected. I am still someone who builds and presents ideas. The relationship ended. I am still someone capable of deep connection. The sentence is not positive thinking. It is factual delineation. You are drawing a boundary between an event that occurred and the identity that persists beyond it. Stage 2 is extraction. Once the emotional charge has diminished enough for your prefrontal cortex to participate, you ask 3 specific questions. What did this experience reveal about my approach that I could not have seen without it? What assumption was I operating under that this outcome has now disproven? And what single adjustment, if implemented immediately, would make my next attempt structurally different from this one? These are not rhetorical questions. You answer them in writing. The act of articulating the lesson forces the brain to process the experience through the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex rather than the amygdala, converting raw emotional data into structured cognitive input. Dr. James Pennybaker at the University of Texas at Austin demonstrated across 30 years of research that expressive writing about difficult experiences produces measurable improvements in immune function, cognitive processing, and subsequent goal-directed behavior. The mechanism is not catharsis. It is cognitive organization. The act of writing imposes structure on chaos, and that structure is what the brain needs to file the experience as data rather than damage. Stage 3 is re-engagement. Within 24 hours of the setback, you take one concrete action toward the same goal or a revised version of it. The action does not need to be large. It needs to be directional. It tells your nervous system that the failure was a data point, not a destination. A single email, a revised outline, a new conversation. One step that breaks the inertial pattern of withdrawal and reestablishes forward motion before avoidance has time to solidify into a habit. Separation, extraction, re-engagement, 3 stages, 24 hours. That is the resilience set. And the reason the 24-hour window matters is neurological. Research from the University of Amsterdam on memory reconsolidation shows that emotional memories are most malleable in the period immediately following their formation. During this window, the brain is actively deciding how to categorize and store the experience. If you intervene with structured processing during reconsolidation, you influence whether the memory is stored as evidence of inadequacy or as evidence of adaptation. Wait too long, and the memory hardens in whatever emotional framework was present at the time of encoding. The window closes, and the untrained default, which is almost always self-diminishing, locks into place. This is why some people carry a single failure for decades while others process a dozen in a year and emerge sharper after each one. The difference is not thickness of skin. It is speed of cognitive processing. The resilient mind runs the reframe protocol quickly, cleanly, and consistently. The fragile mind lets the raw experience sit unprocessed until it calcifies into identity. Now consider what happens when you combine this with everything you have built so far. You have a morning battle that trains initiation, an identity commitment that trains follow-through, a pressure principle that trains discomfort tolerance, a silence protocol that protects motivational integrity, a focus sprint that rebuilds attentional capacity, an emotional hold that prevents reactive damage, and now, a resilience set that converts failure into forward momentum. 7 instruments, 7 trained capacities, each one reinforcing the others. But instruments without a program are just tools scattered across a workbench. What you need next is a system, a structured, daily, progressive training plan that integrates everything you have learned into a single repeatable routine. In the next chapter, you will receive that plan. 30 days, no ambiguity, no improvisation, just a clear sequence of mental workouts designed to permanently rewire the way your mind operates under pressure, under boredom, and under the relentless weight of ordinary life. Chapter 9. The 30-Day Mental Gym and the Mirror Test. 30 days from now, one of 2 people will be occupying your body. The first is the same person listening to this sentence. Same patterns, same negotiations with the alarm, same unfinished intentions stacked on top of each other like unpaid invoices. The second is someone who has accumulated 30 consecutive days of evidence that they do what they say they will do. Which person shows up depends entirely on what you do with the program you are about to receive. Everything you have learned, the morning battle, identity commitment, pressure principle, silence protocol, focus sprint, emotional hold, and resilience set, are individual instruments. Here is the program that turns them into a system. Phase 1, days 1 through 10. Foundation. Each morning, alarm sounds, feet meet the floor. Immediately after, 90 seconds of silence. No phone, no input. Then, during your working hours, 1 10-minute focus sprint. Single task, no interruption. Total daily investment is 12 minutes. The sole objective is a perfect 10-day streak. Dr. Philippa Lally at University College London found that missing a single day in the first 2 weeks of a new habit significantly delays automaticity. These 10 days are not about strength. They are about laying the neural track that strength will run on. Phase 2, days 11 through 20. Loading. Silence extends to 3 minutes. Focus sprints extend to 20 minutes. You add 1 voluntary discomfort per day and run the 6-second emotional hold on at least 2 minor triggers daily. Total investment rises to 30 minutes. By day 20, resistance will still be present, but it will feel familiar rather than threatening. Phase 3, days 21 through 30. Full integration. Silence reaches 5 minutes. Focus sprints reach 25 minutes. The silence protocol activates completely. No active goals discussed with anyone for 10 days. If setbacks occur, run the resilience set within 24 hours. The objective is not perfection. It is resilient consistency. Miss a day, run the failure reframe. Resume without negotiation. On day 31, you start again at higher calibration. This is not a challenge. It is a cycle. Repeat it for as long as you want to keep the mind you are building. Now, you have the system. But none of it matters until you do what comes next. Stand in front of a mirror. Not tomorrow. The next time you are alone. Close the door. Look into your own eyes and answer one question with absolute honesty. Does the evidence of my life match the story I tell about myself? Your bank account is evidence. It reflects your decisions without sentiment. Your body is evidence. It responds to what you did, not what you planned. Your habits are evidence. They reflect the pattern you repeated most often. Your relationships are evidence. They respond to your consistent behavior, with a memory far more honest than yours. The mirror does not negotiate. It does not accept context. It shows you exactly what your accumulated choices have produced, without a single word. Once per week, you stand in front of it and assess. Not with self-hatred, with precision. Where did I honor my commitments? Where did I negotiate? What single adjustment closes the gap in the next 7 days? Write the answer down. Dr. Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia demonstrated that self-assessment accuracy increases by over 40% when performed in writing versus internal reflection. The mirror shows you the truth. The pen forces you to acknowledge it. The untrained mind sees the gap between intention and evidence and feels defeated. It turns away and reaches for the nearest anesthetic. The trained mind sees the same gap and feels directed. It does not flinch. It takes the information, feeds it into the system, and adjusts. Same data, opposite responses. And you already know which one you will choose, because you have spent 9 chapters learning that the response is not determined by the feeling. It is determined by the system you have installed. Your mind was never broken. It was untrained. Now it has a gym. Now it has a program. Now it has a mirror that tells the truth when nothing else will. Train it or lose it.